Welcome to this education session or discussion session organized by the Labour Left Alliance Republican Labour Working Group Network, which has been newly established and is run by Steve Freeman, who will be speaking later. If comrades are interested in participating in that working group, drop us an email, info@labourleft.org, and we can get you in touch with Steve. So this is an important issue, actually, what's been happening. It's quite easy to look at this, the interview with Oprah Winfrey and look at it as like a Hollywood kind of film that has nothing to do with us, and it's just them lot tearing each other to shreds. But I think that would be a bit too easy, and I'm glad we are putting this discussion on, because I think this whole episode reveals quite a big constitutional crisis in the British constitutional system. It's much more than just a shit storm or just an interview and embarrassing the Queen, etc. It shows that actually we would do well as the left to take those issues of constitutional matters seriously and exploit them in order to fight for the democratic transformation of our society towards socialism. I think too often this is viewed by much of the left of you fight for higher wages and you fight in the trade unions, perhaps in Labour Party, but anything that's kind of to do with the monarchy or those kind of things, what's that got to do with us? Let them do it. It's only £1 a year or something that the Daily Express will calculate for you how little the monarchy costs us. But I think it's much more about the question of who rules us and how, and the fact that a monarch, can pass this on to their children, and the Queen still has, on paper, the right to go to war. It's also, I've just learned, still illegal actually to call for the abolition of the monarchy. There's still a law that they've tried a few years to do away with, but on paper, by me saying we should abolish the monarchy, that could be in on paper is illegal, and I could be done for it. But let's all do it anyway, because the more people say things like that, the less likely it is. It's very interesting that in the aftermath of this whole shitstorm, polls show that half of under 44-year-olds are now in favor of abolishing the monarchy. Those polls vary, obviously, they go up and down, and when little Princess Charlotte will have a teenage boyfriend, it will go down again, etc. But I think it's very, very important that we as socialists are quite clear and quite strong on why we oppose the monarchy. It's not so much to do about the money and whatever. It's about who runs society. If you want to democratize the society, want a democracy and socialism, we need to be able to run society. And calling for the abolition of the monarchy, I think, is very much part of this effort, a step towards making the working class into the ruling class, by taking all these issues very, very seriously. So I'm very pleased that we have two speakers tonight who will address this issue, perhaps coming from different angles. First one is my good comrade, Jackie Walker. I'm very happy to see always. And then we'll be followed by Steve Walker. So fire away, Jackie. Welcome.
Okay, and hello to everybody. Well, first of all, I am a Republican. I mean, it's kind of obvious, I'm a socialist, so of course I'm a Republican. So why was I, and why do I remain so engaged and interested in what has been going on with the Meghan Markle story and the royal family? And why do I think every socialist should be engaged and involved with what's going on? So that's really going to be how I'm going to frame it tonight. Well, just in case you hadn't noticed, I may be a Republican and a socialist, but I'm also Black and Jewish and a woman and anti-racist. And why I'm saying that, I think it's really important to place Meghan Markle where she actually is. She is not part of the English aristocracy. I mean, let's remember who she was before she became a rich Hollywood star. She was actually pretty much an ordinary girl of mixed race heritage, as they call it, which is pretty much the same as I call it, although I think you'd find the way she'd identify is exactly the way I would identify, and that is that she is a Black woman. So she comes from this very ordinary family, and her mother's family are all the descendants of former enslaved people. So the first thing I want to say about this is that this is complicated. And when I was talking to people about this on social media, one thing I found kind of frustrating was the way people wanted to simplify this. Yeah, this is just all a load of rich people. Actually, it's not just a load of rich people. This is a very layered story about how oppressions and prejudice work, and the way that functioning goes right to the top, and why it is so important that it goes to the very top. So first of all, I thought I'd think about, what this means for the Black community in the UK. Well, one thing you've got to understand about the Black community, of course, it's as diverse as any other community. We saw them wheel in a Black Lord Lieutenant to say how he had never seen and experienced any anti-Black racism, obviously part of the establishment. And all we have to do is look at the Labour Party and the Tory Party, as well as elsewhere, to think of other Black establishment figures. But mostly, I would say, the Black community is extremely aware of the way racism plays in this country, because mostly Black people come from the poorer and lower class classified levels of British society. However, because of the way that they have been brought up, and also because often their affinity to the church, they have been taught that the monarchy, if you like, is separate to the class system. They actually respect many, not all, just many, the monarchy, and have done, and have looked to the monarchy, if you like, to be that part of the British establishment which stands outside of the structural racism, which for most Black people, they are, extremely, extremely aware of. When Meghan Markle came into the family, into the firm, as it's called, I think for a lot of people of colour, there was a huge amount of excitement. It was thought that this was a real sign that actually there wasn't any glass ceiling to where Black people could go. And so for Black people, I think, certainly for many of them, this is a real signal that that ceiling is very functional and very real. And if you want to look, and if you're interested in the politicization of the Black community, that is an important issue for us to address. So what has it meant? Well, remembering this comes straight on from a discussion about Black Lives Matter, about police violence, about the state killing of Black people, not just, by the way, in the US, but in the UK as well. This is now, I think, for many Black people, building up an undeniable picture of the actual brutality of British anti-Black racism, and the fact that it functions on a much more subtler level than how it functions in the United States. Interesting as well is what it tells us about society as a whole, and I'm going to go back on that in a minute, and what it tells us about the majority white population. And in there, I had just a small feeling of optimism there. Because what you see is, just like there is a political divide, left and right between the generations, there is a divide on how people view race. And I suppose there was part of me that was thinking, well, as soon as people like of my age die off, you know, there is some hope that we might have some kind of truthful conversation, because actually that is what is missing in the UK. The interesting thing about the US is the newspapers could not have got away with the statements that they have been making without being, while saying that they are not racist. And it also links in, I think, with Meghan Markle, and I say this because I have experienced this directly, is that you get this intersection, this hatred of women overlapping this terror of Black women, which ends up into being really quite obsessive. If anybody watched the way Piers Morgan was obsessively, and when I say obsessively, there were times when he was tweeting out about Meghan Markle, who a few years ago he had quite openly been lusting after, by the way, but he was then tweeting against her something like 5 and 10 times an hour. So there's an obsessive quality. And that is the kind of thing I have found with myself, that there is a real obsessive quality. And I think you've only got to look at people like Dawn Butler and Diane Abbott to see what happens to Black women who are in the public eye there. This hatred for women, we've seen come out recently in the way that people have responded, or the police have responded to the vigil. Now, the interesting thing about that, and I don't want to, that's not what I'm talking about, that. I'm thinking about the difference in the way that Kate Middleton was treated when she went along to the vigil. And what she said was, I am here because I have experienced the fear of walking through London streets in the dark. And she was hailed. It was like wonderful. And I want you to just compare that to Meghan Markle saying, I am speaking like this because I have experienced racism, and the condemnation that she actually got for that, which was just extraordinary. And of course, that has all been, or a lot of it has been fermented within our media. This is absolutely crucial for the left. We saw as well what happened to the society, when the Society of Editors came on and actually said, there isn't any racism in the British media. I mean, the fact that they can say that shows exactly how totally cut off they actually are. And I'd like you to know that this is what they say about Ian Murray, who was the chief executive, who in the end had to resign. Ian Murray is an award-winning journalist with 40 years experience in newsrooms. He is vice chair of the Defence and Security Advisory Committee. He also has an honorary doctorate in journalism from Southampton University. Now, if these are the people who are guiding our media, that is people who deny, in the face of absolute evidence, they deny that there's any racism in the British media, I would say no wonder we're in trouble on that. The other thing I think we have to look at is the way that these papers, extraordinary vitriol against Meghan Markle. Remember, these are the same media who have been telling us for probably 5 years now that we must listen to all accusations of racism, that we must listen. This is the media who listened unquestioningly to people like Margaret Hodge and Louise Ellman and the Board of Deputies without any question. And yet, for Black people, when the most powerful Black woman in this country, married into the most powerful family in this country, raises the issue of racism, they don't even just question it, they call her in no uncertain terms a barefaced liar. She's a barefaced liar. Now, you might agree or disagree with what she said, but to call her a barefaced liar, I think, is breathtaking. Just think, a few weeks ago, when that awful book by David Baddiel came out, which was spread all over the media, by the way, which was inaccurate in so many ways, not one commentator challenged his version. Not one, not one. And then we get into another lesson, which I think for Black people and for our white supporters should be really important during this time. And that is about the way that white people respond, the way that white people respond when there are any accusations of racism. Not all white people, of course. And we're talking about the white media, the white establishment, etc. Because what happens is, rather than listening, it's not even that they don't just listen, the level of aggression. And that aggression, by the way, is not just targeted at Meghan Markle, it's targeted at Black people and Black communities. It's a real lesson for us, Black or white, people who want to change things, about how hard it is, how entrenched racism in this society actually is. And I think that's something that I have to say, speaking absolutely frankly, I still find wanting in some sections of the left, the real acceptance that one of the reasons why Black people find it so difficult to come into white groups and organizations is the issue around how racism is dealt with. So I found it a very harsh experience, but I think it was a very, very enlightening experience from white supporters as well as Black supporters. What I was finding was, for many people, there was real shock at how her words were greeted. So I think this is a very important thing for us to follow. But long live the revolution, and yeah, let's have a republic and all that as well. Okay, thanks, Tina.
Yeah. Abolition of monarchy and that kind of thing. Thank you, Jackie. Well, yes, obviously we invited you because you have a, in the spirit of wanting to listen, I think it's very important that we do understand how people of Black comrades view these issues. That's extremely important. Steve Freeman is the next speaker. He's, as I said, he set up the Republican Labour working group in the Labour Left Alliance, and so we're interesting to hear your thoughts on why you've done so, etc.
Okay, thank you, Tina and comrades. There's so much that we can talk about in all of this. Really, culture, attitudes, values, constitutions. It's like almost like everything can be, as well as economic power. The hard thing is trying to work out what to leave out. So the first thing I decided to call my talk was Through a Glass Darkly. And I was going to say why I think that's a good idea for what I want to talk about. CBS said that 49 million people had watched the Oprah interview as it were the latest episode of the royal drama. And And it turns out about, I think you already mentioned this figure, Tina, 60% of the under 25 supported Meghan and Harry, and only 15% of the over 65 support them. So there's clearly a generational divide, as well as the fact the Americans look at it in a different way as well, the way that we tend to see it. So I'm not going to discuss any of the issues that Jackie's talked about. I hoped she was going to talk about that. It's not because I don't think these things are important, but I'm just going to concentrate my talk onto other things which go with that. So I thought I would start with the assumption that all socialists are anti-monarchist, that the whole idea of the monarchy is anathema, absurd, indeed ridiculous, if you think of it. And that's obviously true of the Left Labour Alliance. However, I think there is a difference between anti-monarchism and republicanism. They might seem to be the same, but they're not. All Republicans are against the monarchy, but not all anti-monarchists are Republicans. So that's something that we may look at later, what that distinction is about. I think it has to be explored. But anyway, anti-monarchists are not isolated. A recent survey said that 34% of people are in favour of abolishing the monarchy. That means 66% want to keep it. That's 1/3, 2/3. So, you know, we're not isolated. Anti-monarchists are not isolated. I suppose the question becomes, should we do anything about it? Can we do anything about it? It seems to be generally agreed that we're too weak, too divided to take on a powerful institution like the monarchy. Well, is it powerful? That's one of the things that we need to look at. If we can't do anything about it, then we are prisoners of our own history. Thinking that maybe what we should do is concentrate on other issues, poverty, pay, social, because it's very, very important issues. But it's like saying, well, the best thing we can do is keep kicking this can down the road, and hopefully it'll sort itself out. Republicans tend to see it differently, and I'll maybe come back to that later. So I think Republicans see the idea of kicking the can down the road is not the way we're dealing with the problem. Now, I called it through a glass darkly, because it's a phrase that means to look or observe at something through a mirror or a glass that distorts the picture. Darkly means to have an obscure, imperfect vision of reality. Now, the Apostle Paul uses the metaphor in his first letter to the Corinthians, turns out, where he explains that although we do not see things clearly now, they will become crystal clear at the end of time. Things we see now through this distorted lens will become clear when the end time arrives. And my hypothesis would be we are at the end time. We are at the end of the road for the United Kingdom, both as a union state and as a constitutional monarchy. We might have to discuss that. And I will look at the implications of that at the end of my talk. But I think that the crisis that we're facing, and this is part of the crisis, by the way, means that we will see things about how the monarchy works and what role it plays in society more clearly than we normally would see it. Now, I also thought of the idea of a Shakespearean drama. This is a drama being played out like one of Shakespeare's plays, because it's got everything in it. It's got tragedy, hubris, it's got farce, it's got ambition, deceit, love, racism, sexism, family feuding, just about everything you might find in a Shakespeare's play like Richard III. But it's about a struggle within the ruling class, Richard III, that is, about a struggle within the ruling class between the monarchy and the various aristocratic feudal lords. The peasants don't appear in this very much at all. So we have to remember that the class struggle is not simply one class lines up on one side, another class lines up in the opposite direction. Class struggle takes place within classes, where one part of the class fights against another part of the class in trying to decide what it does. So I think that the royal drama of Meghan and Harry versus the royal family is a bit like a faction fight within the ruling elite, just as Richard, Duke of York, went round bumping off all his rivals. So I think we can see it as a political struggle, and we might find out what that political struggle is actually all about. So we could set this play at the pinnacle of our class society, at the very top of the pyramid. And even at the top of that, even at the top of the ruling class, where the royals are the elite part of it at the very top, whereas we're down at the bottom, looking up like the peasants, wondering what the hell's going on with all this sound and fury taking place. So I thought I'd list the actors in the play. First of all, there's the Crown, played by Boris Johnson, or King Boris. Then there's the Monarch, played by the Queen herself. Then there's Royal Family Limited. I'll come on to that in a minute. Then we've got the national media that I'm not really going to talk about, but Jackie has, and it's very, very important in the story. Then there's the audience, played by ourselves, looking on in amazement, either cheering, booing, or heckling as we see the thing unfold. But the crucial distinction to understand what's going on is between the Crown, played by King Boris, and the Monarch, played by Queen Elizabeth. Now, to understand this idea, we need to go back to 1649, when England had become the first republic. And to talk about kingly power. Okay, what's kingly power? I've used before a quote from the leader of the Diggers, Gerard Winstanley, written in 1649, when England was facing the danger of counter-revolution. And he asked really whether the Commonwealth, the Republic, would continue, and if it continued, we'd be able to live in peace and freedom, or he said, would kingly power be restored? And he uses the word kingly power. And then he says, kingly power is either one person to rule, an autocrat, the monarchy, literally the monarch, the one person, which is the true meaning of monarchy, one person to rule, or he says, a few will rule in the name of the king. And we could call this the second option as oligarchy. A few people will rule in the name of the king using kingly power. Okay, kingly power obviously rests on the royal bureaucracy, it rests on the standing army, and all that power concentrated in the hands of the oligarchy, the people who are actually ruling our society. And power, of course, in this system comes from the top down. It can be devolved downwards or concentrated upwards. And this is the true meaning of the now fashionable word devolution. It's the power of the crown being devolved down, or it can be taken back again. Now, if in the 17th century didn't abolish kingly power, but replaced the rule of one person, the monarch, sanctified as the divine right of kings, with a kingly power sanctioned by Parliament based on the landed aristocracy, the commercial and financial aristocracy under what they call the sovereignty of the crown in Parliament. So, what happened to kingly power? Let's go ahead to 300. Let's come forward 350 years. Where have we got to? Okay, well, the UK became an empire. We had an industrial revolution. We created the working class. We created the Labour Party. The working class became the majority of society. The UK remained part of the global capitalist economy. But what happened to the oligarchy and the monarchy now in this modern world? Well, I think they take the form almost of two organizations. The first one I will call the Crown, or the Crown PLC, or the Crown Corporation. Its headquarters are known by their locations, Downing Street and Whitehall. When you hear Downing Street and Whitehall, you know that's where the oligarchy is operating using the power of the crown, using crown powers. In political theory, the oligarchy is sometimes called the core executive. It's not the same as a cabinet, by the way, a core of people, the core executive. And the chief executive of this body is currently Boris Johnson, King Alexander Boris Johnson. Now, the royal family. We could talk about the Royal Family Limited. The second capitalist firm is the royal family. Employs about 1,000 people, including, of course, maids, footmen, valets, cooks. So many names I couldn't mention. The keeper of the privy purse, the treasurer of the Queen, the warden and master of the swans, and you could go on like this for quite a long time going through all of these, the Lord Chamberlain, or the Master of Horse, etc. But the directors of the Royal Family Limited are the Queen, the Duke, Charles, Andrew, Anne, Edward, William, etc., and until recently Harry. This is a private company, which the Duke of Edinburgh rightly called the firm. And it's a bit like a secret society, bound up by historic ties and family loyalties. And trying to get out of it is a bit like leaving the mafia. It's very difficult. Edward VIII, Princess Diana, and Prince Harry were always tried to do this in the past. Moments of high drama and moments of royal crisis, because nobody has very much idea what goes on in Royal Family Limited, because it's like a secret society. And the message to us is it's not political. Jackie mentioned that point. It's not part of the class struggle. But at a time of crisis is the moment when the curtain opens a bit and we start to see what's going on inside, when the confidentiality breaks open and we get a glimpse of the struggle that is going inside in the form of a factional struggle. And when that happens, of course, with anybody who leaves is exposed, obviously understands the oppressive nature of this system, and it also poses a systemic danger, and hence those leaving become, as it were, the enemy. Now, what about the role of the Queen in this? The Queen's got a key role in all of this. The Queen or the King is the linchpin in this political system, because she's the head of the Family Limited, this private company, and she's also the head of Crown PLC. So these two parts are like an arch where they're dependent on each other. The Crown protects the royal family and the firm protects the Crown. And of course, it's King Boris who deploys the kingly power to govern the country. Shelley famously called the monarchy the knot that ties the robber's bundle, because the Queen is in effect the chair of two businesses, and she meets Boris Johnson once a week to sort out the business that they need to sort out. So with that in mind, we're talking about the royal family. We're not actually talking about the Crown here and what that means. So I'm just making that separation. So there's a battle royal going on within the Royal Family Limited. Of the many stories that Meghan and Harry told, one stood out for me. She said during their wedding, Kate had made Meghan cry. Apparently, Kate then sent a letter apologizing and a bunch of flowers. 7 months later, the story was splashed in the Tory press as the direct opposite. Meghan had made Kate cry, apparently in this. Now, the significance of this story is, first of all, how did it get into the national media? Who put it out? And what was the motive of doing this? And more significantly, the palace didn't tell the truth or correct the press reports. So this suggests there's some sort of political struggle going on, and somebody's trying to damage the reputation of the Sussex royals. So that's been done quite deliberately. Now, the former royal correspondent, Peter Hunt, expresses it a bit like this. He says, and he explained this on Radio 4, there are in fact 3 palaces in this Royal Family Limited company. All right. And he explained that Christopher Guy had been the person who some time ago, maybe a year or two ago, got sacked. He was the person who kept it together. And now what we've got is we've got 3 palaces who are now briefing against each other. We got Buckingham Palace where the Queen is. We got St. James's Palace where Charles is. And then we got Kensington Palace where William is. And this battle royal is a battle over succession, and it's about updating the royal family model, which combined, well, we won't go into the royal family model, but the royal family model that was invented in the 50s, quite different from the European version, the so-called bicycling royals. Now, public opinion understands this. There's a Survation poll recently published in the Sunday Mirror on the 14th of March. And it says, 41% of people thought the Oprah interview damaged both Meghan and Harry and the royal family. 34% wanted us to become a republic. I mentioned this figure before, and 66% wanted to remain a constitutional monarchy. And I think Tina also said, however, 50% of the under 44s want a republic. So younger people are looking in a different direction. However, the royalists, there's 2/3 royalists, as it were, They're not a solid bloc. 45% of them want Charles to stand aside for William, and only 35% of people want the historical line of succession to go through Charles. And this, it turns out, reflects political ideas of Tory voters. The Tory voters, it turns out, were for Charles, and it turned out that Labour voters in this survey were much more for William. So there is a battle going on behind the scenes that we don't normally see about the future of the monarchy, whether the Queen should step aside, whether Charles should be there, etc. Now, this Meghan and Harry story has got to be part of that battle in some way. We don't necessarily know all of what's going on, we don't only see a bit of it. So, objectively, any crisis in the royal family is a Republican opportunity, but the fact is there's no Republican Party, or to put it another way, there's no class in British society which has an interest or sees an interest in having a democratic republic. Not the City of London, not corporate capital, not the middle classes, not the TUC, not the trade unions, or even the Labour Party. The most advanced part of the working class, the most that people are looking for is to restore the 1945 social contract, which I call the social monarchy. That's really where people are thinking. So there isn't really at the moment, any force that would turn a crisis into a republic. So we can have a crisis, it ain't going to turn into a republic because of the situation. So let's just conclude at this point then. I started with the phrase from St. Paul to the Corinthians, looking through the glass darkly and seeing things in a distorted way, and how we can see things more clearly at the end of time. The United Kingdom is over, says the Welsh Labour First Minister Mark Drayford, and a new union should be crafted to reflect a voluntary association of 4 nations. But he says, because there's no institutional architecture to make the UK work. So it seems that the political system, which is about the crown rather than the royal family, by the way, that's the point I wanted to get over. The crown has got a problem. The rule of the crown is a problem. It's not just something in the royal family, but these two separate things are connected. So if we're at the end time, or at the end of the road for the United Kingdom, both as a union state and a constitutional monarchy, then we're in some period of an epoch of terminal crisis, where things have degenerated beyond repair. And what that means is that the power of the centre is giving away to increasing polarization in society. The strong centre is not holding us all together. It's a bit like Brexit, where all of a sudden the centre couldn't hold and society polarized off in different directions. This is quite a different thing. It's not the normal politics that we're not seeing. This was the fate of Italy's constitutional monarchy under Victor Emmanuel III in the deep crisis after the First World War. The king handed power to Mussolini in 1922, and Italy became a republic in 1946. In Spain, of course, it was the other way around. In Spain, the constitutional monarchy of King Alfonso XIII was replaced by the Second Republic in 1931. 8 years later, after the Civil War, Spanish fascism was victorious as an alliance between the nationalists and the phalangists. So in other words, if the centre can't hold, then the two extremes that we face ourselves on one side is republicanism and fascism. That's the two. They're not there yet. So the ruling class and people are not ready for either solution, and they're going to try everything possible to preserve the status quo, which cannot be preserved because it's bankrupt. So there'll be more devolution, radical federalism, proposals for a reform monarchy, slimmed down European style, proportional representation, and all of these reforms are not really solutions. They are part of the process of degeneration. They are simply attempts to delay what is historically inevitable. So the problem for us is that delay and procrastination is very dangerous for the working class. So we don't really live in a democracy, and this isn't a democracy, we live in a liberal state. And the more the liberal regime is seen to fail, the more appealing is the idea of an English nationalist strongman dictator, etc. And that's more likely to come out of the crisis. The longer we leave pears in the fruit bowl and do nothing to throw them out, the moldier, more rancid, and more poisonous they become. Waiting and looking in the fruit bowl every day and doing nothing about it is not the answer. So I finish there.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Comrades, if you want to make a contribution or ask a question of either speaker, please raise hand. I'm from Germany, obviously. We got rid of our king in 1918, chased him out of the country. Funnily enough, they're coming back now and want their money back, but they're getting quite the fight from the German courts about this, cheeky buggers. What struck me from Jackie's opening, which I thought was very interesting, is how a lot of Black people see the monarchy almost outside, or used to see it outside of, the class structure or even the racist, what they experience as racism, that they're beyond it and stuff, and how that has been ripped open is interesting, isn't it? And how actually countries of the Commonwealth are now discussing very seriously getting rid of the Queen as the monarch, because it's ripped that open. I guess it must have been a long time coming, of countries that were based on slavery, exploited, etc., have a white queen there. How that could be kept intact for so long is quite something. Also, the what struck me from Harry's interview when he came on, which was actually quite moving, I thought, is the idea that his dad and his brother cannot escape. And he used those words, they cannot actually escape. They are trapped within this gilded cage. And I don't think it's a very nice life at all. And, if we could do one thing and do them all a favor by abolishing the monarchy, they could lead much richer and rounder lives. I think most of these people, I don't think any of them are particularly happy in this ridiculous institution. So yes, as Democrats, we want to rule. We believe the socialists, as socialists, the working class should run society. So getting rid of the monarchy is a very important step in that direction. Okay, a few comrades now who want to ask questions or speak. First one was Bob, please. Bob Davis.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, I can. Excellent. Okay, thank you both for your little chat then on this fascinating topic and subject. Yeah, I didn't watch all the interview. I saw most of it. I certainly saw the juicy bits that were portrayed on the British media and the American media. I mean, firstly, a few points. It doesn't surprise me that some in the firm have now been called out as racists. It seems to me that the royal family have a problem, I think, in rebranding itself, moving from its old colonial heritage with its racist baggage to be accepted into a modern branding and a formal, official, anti-racist perspective that Britain now attempts to portray. So I think there's a clash there between the older members of the family and the younger, more modern members of the family, if you like. So it doesn't surprise me. Firstly, secondly, I also thought the interview gave an insight into how dysfunctional that the monarchy are. I mean, this control freakery that Meghan Markle spoke about the firm. I mean, she spoke about suicide. It reminded me of that old shenanigans of Diana a few decades ago. And Tina said about you can't escape from this particular institution. So, the idea of someone who's not from the same class as the monarch coming into that type of family and how alienated that environment must have been. I mean, I only recently learned from that interview, the royal family has an HR department, for God's sake. It's got a human resources department, for God's sake. I mean, how twisted is that? I'm reading a book called Symbol and Privilege at the moment. I think it was produced in the late 1980s. It's on the British royal family by an author called Ilsa Hayden, and that author points out how the royal family reinforces status and subjugation, inequalities, and entitlement within society. And she's looking into royal ceremonies that the Queen goes to. The whole idea of the opening of Parliament, Shooting Cara, Royal Ascot, Remembrance Sunday, sand. We're teased as subjects of the monarch, and how lucky we are to see the Queen. We get a glimpse into her life occasionally. And on the other hand, it keeps subjects at a distance. Don't come too close to the Queen. You can see her doing this, you can see her doing that, but it reinforces a distance, and it reinforces a class, a position. It's a very interesting book, something that I agree with. And finally, on the, I think what Steve was pointing to, especially talked about, was the political power of the Queen. I mean, recently, I think The Guardian in the last couple of months did quite a useful expose of Queen consent, and her looking over proposed law, and in effect, the role of the Privy Council, that democratic body, the Queen, and joining the armed forces. When you join the armed forces, the Army, Navy, the Air Force, you sign a declaration defending allegiance to the Queen and country. So you can imagine, can't you, comrades, in times of civil war, in times of anti-protest, when the establishment will be threatened, at the end of the day, all these allegiances, these establishment symbols and gestures point to a defense of the monarch, point to a defense of the British establishment. It's something that needs challenging.
Thank you, Bob. Marion next, please.
I think this is a really important question that we're looking at here. I can remember a few years back in Birmingham getting into a row and almost walking out of a meeting because people were not, well, one particular person in a particular group didn't see the importance of understanding how the royal prerogative was used and how it's used in undemocratic ways. And that's not an important issue, but it's key because as Jackie said, it's about power. It's about the exercise of power. And as Democrats, we obviously want working class and our allies to be in power and to open up more democracy, not less democracy. And I'm a Republican because I don't believe that in the divine right of kings or queens, and this so-called hereditary principle that these people were born to it, that's not what we as socialists believe. So I think we do have to take this very seriously. And the whole institution is racist. Racism is endemic, as is sexism. And we have to do everything we can to fight for real democracy. And if you're going to fight for democracy, you can't have a so-called constitutional monarch. Get out of the way, Kat. You can't have a constitutional monarch that can overrule the elected representatives of the people, which the royal prerogative is all about. And it's exercised through the Prime Minister, whoever that may be at the time. So it's quite an important issue, and it is very serious because the debate at the moment it's becoming more of a strong state. If that bill that's being discussed now in Parliament goes through, the state is getting stronger, and the right to object to what is being done will make it a lot harder. So, and also we had the spy bill that went through a little while ago. All these are very important attack on people's ability to fight the system, and that's what it's about. So you have to understand that we have to fight for a republic, and we need that in order for the working class to exercise its power when the day that we have a socialist revolution in this country. So for me, it's one of the key questions, and unfortunately there's been a bit more talk going on recently, but we do actually need to actually keep on the fight. so that we do become a republic. I didn't watch it. I've just seen the excerpts that I've seen on the media. I didn't think I could bear watching it. Maybe it sounds more interesting now what other people have said, but I do think we have to ensure that everybody on the left understands why it's important to actually fight for a republic. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Marion. Yes, that bill is a huge attack on our right to protest. I've just put a petition in the chat. It's not much, but it's you know, we have to fight back on various levels. Okay, Anthony is next. Anthony R. Hello, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Yes, the box came up on my screen.
Done.
Yes. Yes, I was very interested by Jackie and Steve's presentation. A lot of thoughts there, and I think what's come out of this is how the contradictions in the monarchy have been highlighted by the experience that we're hearing about from Meghan and Harry. But what I wanted to throw in was the argument that we often get when talking about replacing the monarchy from people who want to keep things as they are is, what will you put in its place? We don't want a US style president, do we? And my response is, I think that's the wrong question. Rather than saying what do we put in its place, we should be asking the question, what are the duties of a head of state, and what is the most appropriate way of fulfilling those duties in a modern democracy? And there are a number of models that could be presented rather than having either a monarch or an elected president. I mean, closely connected to the existence of a monarchy is the existence of the House of Lords, of course. And if we were to have an elected House of Lords, elected, I would say, on a different cycle and by a different pattern to the House of Commons, then we could have a sort of rotating head of state even. This is just a suggestion. It's not, I'm not putting it up, asking people to shoot it down. It's just an idea to say that there are different models, and we could have a representatives from our second chamber taking on the duties of the House of Lords on a rotating basis. Sorry, taking on the duties of the head of state on a rotating basis. It's just a thought in answer to the question of who should be our head of state. Let's turn the question around. Thank you.
Thanks, Comrade. You could also ask the question differently. Do we need a head of state? Do we need a second chamber? I reckon we don't, you know, with the Democrats.
I think that raises the question that should the head of state should the person carrying out the ceremonial duties be the same as our head of government? And I think there are arguments against that.
Usually heads of states and chambers, second chambers, are there to quell the to stop the will of the people, rather than, you know, it's the balance of powers that's always used as actually a way to keep the working class and the people down and stop them from making quick decisions. So I think we could,
I mean, there are different views about that.
Okay, Anthony Brain can't find his button, so I'm going to take you in now for a couple of minutes. Anthony, there you go.
I think Steve gave a very good presentation. and not just about between classes, but within classes, and how all that's interlinked. Because last Thursday, I was talking about, and you can watch it on the video on Labour Left Alliance, I expected the vigil and the big upheaval of woman question is tons of Black Lives Movement. I said on the Black Lives Movement, if you went around the White House, and I said to my mum once, and I wrote it at the time, the Trump administration could fall, which has happened now because of the big left shift. For the I didn't vote Biden, but it was mass pressure why they had to incorporate that. I would vote for the Capitalist Party. But what Steve talked about, how the monarchy rules, is very important in how they rule and how they affect the masses. They're split over the EU, over Scotland, over to deal with the women and youth radicalisation. Some of them may want to incorporate the radicalisation for the marriage. A lot of the right-wing press realise they've underestimated the radicalisation, they've blown it, and all the scandals are coming out, sweated in the system, or the austerity and all these things that are going on. We've got to fight for a republic and a workers' republic and combine the struggles against racism, sexism, and the austerity, and fight for the kind of society we want. It could be the capitalism could be threatened in the next year or two. Look what's happened on the anti-race and the Black Lives Movement. They might have to pull back on austerity. If Corbyn was leading the Labour Party, they wouldn't be doing that to the nurses. They wouldn't be going out to all the tax stealths and all the cutbacks and all the austerities that before Labour is growing. But some people are becoming revolutionary in the middle class. I think, as I said before, the middle class want revolutionary change more than the working class. And that goes what Trotsky said when he wrote about Shakespeare, which Steve talked about in Literature and Revolution. He was saying Shakespeare was a genius, but he was a genius here with one or two people who wrote. A whole number of people could have been Shakespeare because he was born in a revolutionary time of the decay of feudalism and the rise of capitalism. And we're heading for where there could be more socialist revolutions now. The reason they got rid of the monarchy in Germany, Tina would notice in 1918, I'll finish here and Tina could talk about it. The Communist Party, when they got rid of the Kaiser, was declaring the Workers' Republic. Didn't Ebert in 1918 say, we told the Kaiser, you've got to go, we've got to declare a bourgeois liberal republic because that's when we can stop the Communist Party. I mean, that's how it unfolded. And capitalism could be seriously threatened. They may try Harry again to contain the radicalisation. If that doesn't work, you have to be a republic like that. It could be like the February Revolution. What's interesting, I want to share, they're saying how the women led the protests around the textile workers, and some of the Victorian people on Twitter I saw this afternoon were talking about, well, the February Revolution broke out because of the women's struggle. Could it be this? You got the protests in Australia. What else is happening? But there's some very good feminist women now becoming Trotskyists in Canada and America, which are very impressive and changing some of the practices of some of the groups. So there could be a wider recruitment. If Trotsky becomes a major threat, they're going to have to change because we support the struggle of the oppressed. Through intersectionality in the working class, the autonomy of the oppressed, through the combined revolution of feminism. Before Barnes took over the Socialist Workers' Party in the 80s, we tried to work down the black question, we applied on women. So all these questions are interlinked. But the monarchy, the fight against the monarchy, whatever we fight for a workers' republic, the first opportunity to fight for a republic is tremendous to working class anyway. And it creates a more democratic society. In that framework, we try and get a workers' rule at first opportunity, but you might not get there. It depends how the revolutionary process unfolds. But we're not scheming, it's about stage. It depends on the balance of forces and tactics.
Okay, comrade, can you wind up now, please?
That's what I was going to say. I'll finish my point.
Okay, thank you. Marie Lynham, please.
Hello. Yes, it's a very thank you to Jackie for what she how she explained the way she saw this situation. And now am I muted?
No, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Right. Yes, it seems to me it's an extremely complex and rich debate where I was quite taken by the idea that something is happening now and there's a big change which has to happen in the structures of the country with all its nations in it. And I don't think it's specific to Britain, but it is more visible in Britain because of its imperial structure that it built internally when it expanded, when it made colonies. So in fact, its relationship with Scotland, Ireland, and Wales is colonial or semi-colonial, and you see it all the time. And the result of that is that internally, people no longer accept these things. People of the world are informed, the people of Britain are informed, and they are no longer just letting things happen over there in the world without taking an interest. And so, and now the war in Iraq has warned that the British people are opposed to war, which means that the imperial structure feels threatened. And this empire is very, very powerful because it's one of the most complete in the world. It was the first one to create itself. It dominated the world. It still has a very strong structure. And now, through what it has got left in the Commonwealth and the relationship with the world through, for example, the English language and through finance, there is a power behind the monarchy, which perhaps it's only just a supposition, doesn't exist so much behind the monarchies in other countries in the rest of Europe, perhaps the Belgian or something. I'm not sure about this, but it seems to me when we deal here with the power of the monarchy and the crisis which we are beginning to guess at, we come to realize that we are not dealing with just a small national narrow question of power, but a power which has to do with capital, which has to do with the finance paradise, which has to do with the capital, finance capital worldwide, which has to do with war and the military and the constant defeats of world and British imperialism in the world. And then on top of it all, there is the church and the link between the church and the monarchy. So just to finish, I thought it was very perceptive. Somebody mentioned how Kate had wanted to commit, not Kate, Meghan had wanted, she had thought about suicide. And this connect with the realization, my realization that that structure is oppressive to the maximum and rejects absolutely anybody who is not agreed. So it's like a clan or a mafia, and if you are not in, you are out. And if you are out, you must be properly out and you don't come back, which is the experience which has been made not just by Meghan or Wills, but before with Diana, for example. And so it is a tremendous subject. I'm very pleased that so many people are taking an interest, and I hope we continue to develop these ideas later on and that we make them a basis to actually make proposals to the LLA for the building of a Republican current of the left Labour Republican current.
Indeed, there is a working group. Thank you, Marie. Steve is leading it. If you want to get involved, can you email info@labourleft.org, and I will pass on your details to Steve to add you to the group. Okay, Albert Collymore is the next person to speak, please. Hello, Albert. You're still muted. Can you unmute yourself? I know you're trying.
Yes.
There you go.
Hello.
Hello, all good.
Hello, everybody. I found it extremely interesting discussion. I just want to make 2 points, start off by 2 points, and I put it in the comments. A multi-millionaire been interviewed by a billionaire. That's Meghan, the multi-millionaire, and Oprah Winfrey, the billionaire. These two individuals speaking on racism is actually disturbing to me because it lacks any race and class understanding. You have to remember when Meghan got married, there was a superficial change that was taking place. There was a reconfiguration where the establishment wanted to portray the monarchy as some all kind of inclusive organization, which we know is not true from history. Queen Elizabeth I in the 16th century sent out the first slave ship named Jesus. That's the root of the monarchy, yeah, from a Black perspective, historically. And I'm rather perturbed, and I have to be honest, as to the use of Meghan Markle as the spokesperson on the ideas of racism. There's two questions I ask myself regarding Meghan. There's some who argue she ran away from race all her life. She never embraced her Blackness, or wasn't, in other words, socially constructed, i.e., lived within a Black family within a certain time, to therefore have an understanding of what racism was. Meghan, as a 13-year-old, appeared on television, interviewed in her school. And I asked her, what was your major concerns, Meghan? This is a woman who grew up in Canada. Pretty middle class family, white father, working in the film industry, allegedly went to private school. I'm not too sure, more than likely. Jesus. Syria. I'm
Okay.
sorry about that. Sorry about that. But my concern is twofold. It's about Meghan becoming the spokesperson. We have a commentariat of race commentators appearing on television everywhere without giving analysis, clear analysis of the real conditions being suffered by Black and Asian community. That has been totally lost, totally been lost. And we have to remember, there's a lot of Black people in terms of historically, because of the colonial history, going back into the Commonwealth, going back to Africa and all them other people, other things, have a kind of foggy idea about the monarchy, never contextualized. And we always have to remember there's a connection between the various African kingdoms very early on in slavery. And I don't know if many people are aware that most of the slaves were sold by the various African kingdoms. They had their monarchy, they had their structures, they had their kingdoms. I know I'm slightly going all over the place, but I want to make one point, another point. Harry is deemed as a radical. This is Harry who went and fought in Afghanistan, who referred to Muslims as ragheads that he was killing. We have to be very careful when we're using Meghan to address the issue of racism without implying the class question about the monarchy. Two things came out. Meghan was crying about she couldn't get any protection for her child. As a taxpayer, I cannot get any protection for the Black working class kids in my local area. We as taxpayers paying for them do not protect our kids. Yet Meghan is making it as a taxpayer, I have to fund for her children. I know I'm being slightly reductive, may not be too political in a sense, but I am disturbed that we're allowing Black celebrities to become commentators, presenting Meghan as an icon when she's an undeserving icon, married into privilege, continues to have her privilege, and we want to use her as a beacon. The question I ask, where was the uproar regarding Diane Abbott, who over the last 20 years has faced more abuse than any other Black person in this country, yet we have not attempted to deal with that at all. We're using this simple issue of privilege, access to privilege, to disguise an understanding of where racism comes from, where the monarchy is underfounded. It's very capitalist nature, it's defensive capitalism. And that's what Meghan bought in. She wanted the privilege, she wanted everything that goes with it. Within 4 years, she woke up and said, oh my God, racism exists. When you've been in denial for your whole life. And this is an argument I've consistently, over the last week, I've had within the Black community from a Black Marxist perspective. From Marxist perspective, and that's what we need to focus on. While it's opened the doors, if we don't put a class analysis on it, we would lose it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Albert. Very strong points. And I'm bringing in Jackie straight away after you. She wants to reply to your things. Thanks for that, Albert.
Well, I'm going to go through some of those points because I think they're really crucial. Because one thing I'd say, if I'm going to talk about, to some extent, this is a huge issue about the intersection between race and class. Some people were suggesting that Meghan was the same class as the rest of the aristocracy. I mean, she's not. That's the point. The point is, this is why this has happened to her. And that is not how race and money and power intersect with each other. You know, you can be rich and still be the subject of racism. These are not two impossible things. And as we know, you know, this is a really complex issue. If you want to read more about it, I suggest you read what CLR James said about the way that colour plays in terms of colour being almost like a stigmata, that it's like a permanent marker on you of some kind of class history. If you're Black, Caribbean, diaspora extraction, your colour is saying to everybody that at some point your heritage was within enslavement. And certainly for somebody like Meghan, you know, that enslavement only goes back to 1870. So it's not that far away. And which is the same, you know, for me, my great-grandmother's mother was born into slavery. This makes it's a real issue about the interplay between race and class. Now, she is not, and nobody here has been advocating that she should be a spokesperson, by the way, for people who have been the victims of anti-Black racism. But what she has done is done something which is very difficult, almost impossible in the culture we have and the media culture we have, which is to open up a space in which race and the issue of anti-Black racism in this country can be spoken of. And that, I'm going to say this again, it was astonishing to see the head of our newspaper editors come on and deny that there was any racism, and he had to leave. Now, of course, they will replace him with somebody who's probably just as bad, and however much we'd like it to change, it's not going to change instantly. But I think it was quite shocking for a lot of people, the way that that was dealt with by the press. And can I say, Albert, I'm really shocked at you bringing up any discussion about whether Meghan is Black or not. I actually find that deeply offensive. And, you know, that's all I'm going to say about it. I find it deeply offensive. She identifies as Black. Her mother is Black. She is Black. End of story. And I just even won't tolerate that kind of conversation, whatever political purpose it has. And it's that kind of conversation that has done the Black community so much damage. And that in itself is the heritage of slavery, where people were actually marked depending on what color they were and how their value was placed on how light or dark skinned they were. She has never, that I have seen, denied her identification as a Black woman, and neither should we as socialists or as human beings. And I'm sorry, but I find that quite disturbing. I also dispute your analysis of the history of slavery. There's no doubt that that issue of the Black monarchs dealing in the slave trade happened, but not to the extent that you're suggesting. And certainly, there is no way that I'm suggesting that she's a beacon. And there is no way that I think she is speaking for the experience of everyday Black people. But I want to just say, when I heard her speak about how she felt to be the victim and the focus of the media's anti-Black racism, I felt that was something I connected with absolutely, absolutely, as did many other Black women. And that in itself, whether, take away the bit about being a spokesperson, to hear that being said in that way is for me of absolute importance, to hear somebody like that saying it. And whether, you know, whether we can have a long conversation about how that fits into the strata, how race and class and money, and how much money, you know, is part of the race class dialogue. We can do that. But what we can't do is deny her Blackness. And what we can't do is deny that she has opened up a space for people to express how they feel. I mean, that would be like denying women the right to actually say that, you know, with this recent case of this murder, that hasn't opened up a space in which women can't talk about the assaults that they have suffered. It's important that people can do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Michael Craig next.
Yeah, at the beginning, I think it was Jackie said that the monarchy is incompatible with democracy, and also the monarchy, or sorry, capitalism is incompatible with democracy. And the trouble with the idea of a republic, and we see this in Ireland where I come from, it raises all sorts of questions. The republic a couple of hundred years ago in Ireland was the idea that you could, it ushered in the bourgeois society and get rid of the old feudal society. That's what part of it was about. And the trouble is that Republicans in Ireland have held on to that, haven't moved forward to socialism at all. We socialists here call it the stages theory. And if you look at who's involved in the Republic movement in England, many of them are businessmen. There's even Tories in it, you know, Liberal Democrats and what have you. It's not really in the interest of our class as working class people. And we see that, here's an example. Martin McGuinness, who's one of the leaders of the Republican movement, in 1972 was interviewed on the TV, and he talked about having a socialist republic. 40 years later, he was opening a branch of the stock exchange in Belfast. You know, how is that in the interest of our class? I think this idea of a republic is anti-socialist. You know, we need to move forward, forgetting about that part of it. We don't need leaders of states. We need, you know, collective leadership. And I think that republicanism becomes nationalism. And you get it whenever, I don't know whether Jeremy Corbyn calls himself a Republican, but he certainly criticised the monarchy plenty. But a few years ago when he came to Northern Ireland, he didn't come to see his own members in the Labour Party here. He went to see Sinn Féin. And the other side of the argument is that you have all these loyalist groups, the ones, including the ones that are threatening violence because of the protocol. It's not the British government or the state that they want to be part of. It's the crown, it's the monarchy and all the institutions that go with it. But yet, in their local communities, they will preach Keynesianism. They'll preach a kind of socialism. And there's a big contradiction here that people don't see. This battle here is about territory. It's not about class. And if you join forces with other classes, the classes who keep us down, they always win. They always take control. And that's why I see a danger in that.
Sorry, I'm going to take Minnie next and then John. Thank you.
Hiya, can you hear me?
Yes, all good. Hello.
Hello. Deep breath. Right, start with a joke. My Scouser fellow has just gone to the loo, but he says, publicans not looking through a glass darkly, Steve, but publicanism looking through a beer glass darkly. So I want to start with that. Also, I just wanted to say that today, you know, whether billionaires are monarchy or they're Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, they've all got to be gone of, really, haven't they? And today, only today, it's like they're taking the piss, and they know that they are the kind of monarchy, the oligarchy, because Elon Musk said today he's got a new job title, he's renamed his job title, and that is, I've got scribble everywhere here, Techno King, all one word, no capital K for King, Techno King. And his CEO or his finance chief is master of coins. So that's like, hey, we're the monarchy, really, isn't it? It's kind of thing. I also wanted to say, agree with what Jackie said. Thanks for that. And also want to say that the conversation in the media has brought people into the media. I've seen Diana on the media talking about this issue of race and Meghan. Also, there was a talk tonight, there's a media reform coalition at the moment. Jeremy Corbyn launched it last night. They're looking at the media. And tonight there's Black Lives Matter in the media with Carrie-Anne Mendoza. So if you go on the Media Reform Coalition website, you can see there's going to be one on misogyny in the media. That was Black Lives Matter in the media tonight. Also, wanted to say we're looking forward to the play, Stephen. Hope it's going to be in blank verse. But I wanted to talk about land. I think the Queen, does she own? We want workers, and you know, we want a socialist community. We want our socialist world to be. We're going to need, obviously, we're going to need the land. The Queen owns, and this is a global thing. This is international, socialist, international perspective. The Queen owns 6.6 billion acres of land. Is that 1/6 of the planet worldwide? And this has links to climate change through imperialism, obviously, as all over the world, has links to climate change, like the Crown Estate. Well, they have rights to anything underneath your house, so that, you know, you can be fracked under your house. So that has, you know, and also Diego Garcia, she's got powers, the Queen, the monarch, and whoever it's going to be next. She signed away Diego Garcia to the Americans, some big and massive military base, although that's threatened by climate change. It could disappear when the seas rise. But I just wanted to say, and they make laws to suit themselves as well. That's been in the news, or they have Boris Johnson or the Crown or whatever, I don't know what that character is, make laws for them. And a lot of this land abroad, you know, in the imperial Crown Estate is tax haven, obviously, and they've got a lot of their money in there, the monarchy. All of this points to world revolution, absolutely. So I think that's really what I wanted to say. Just checking my scribble now. Yeah, thanks for the talk and thanks for all the work. Cheers.
Thanks, Minnie. Okay, next is John Tubman, please.
Right, thank you very much. I'm just unmuting myself.
You are unmuted, John.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
By the way, I've eaten my pears out of the bowl this morning.
Good.
There's, if I can just comment on what Michael said, I think we all know where he's coming from, but to me, the reason why we need to take a Republican perspective on working class struggle is the huge amount of unaccountable discretionary power, including all the coercive power of the capitalist state, which is vested in the executive. And that power stands and will stand between the working class and socialism. That is the if you like, the peculiarity of British capitalism as it has transformed compared to capitalism in comparable OECD countries, or most of them anyway. For me, there were two things raised by the discussion, which I think has been very good. The first was raised by Steve, and that is, how does the left, how do we move the left beyond the 1945 welfare state socialist democracy agenda to a socialist Republican outlook? And secondly, how does the left relate organizationally to Black struggle, which I think was raised by Jackie, or it's implicit in what Jackie had to say. And incidentally, I think it was Bob who mentioned about the monarchy struggling to update itself to modern anti-racism. I really struggle with the idea that in the 21st century, Britain is a non-racist state or a non-racist nation. It certainly isn't. I think that, I mean, my kids' generation, and my kids are in their mid and late 20s, is mostly made up of people with what my generation would have called the colorblind approach to racism. It's not anti-racism as such. I don't want to say too much about this whole idea of who's on one side and who's on the other. I think there are, it is true that every Black person who identifies with being Black will experience racism within capitalism and possibly within socialism as well. But it's also true that some white people will understand racism. And I don't necessarily count myself in that number. But the thing is, how do we relate organizationally to Black struggle? And I don't think that the left ever solved this problem. Certainly not the left that I was a part of from the 1970s onwards.
Could you wind up now, comrade? Sorry.
Yeah, okay. It's just that I think those are the practical questions about how we go forward on this. Okay.
Thank you, comrade. Shanti, would you like to switch your camera on and your microphone? And Anne, these are the two other speakers I have. If you could both switch your cameras on. Okay, I'm going to take Anne first because she seems ready. Shanti, I'm going to take you afterwards. So, Anne.
Okay, thanks. It's a really interesting discussion, and it's good that we're actually having these differences because, you know, it shows that there's a real discussion to be had and people are engaged with it. In terms of what Albert said, I think Albert has maybe clarified it anyway in the comments, but I understood that he was saying not that Meghan Markle was not Black, but just that she has never made it an issue before. But I mean, I don't know whether that's true or not. But what I think is this, is that I agree that like she and her husband are really looking for protection, you know, for security in order to sustain a multi-millionaire's lifestyle. And that's not something that I feel any degree of sympathy for in terms of that. And so therefore, I don't think we should take their side in terms of that. But what I do think is important that despite the fact that they are privileged, herself and Harry, etc., 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 they have pointed to some very true aspects of the way in which the British monarchy operates, that it is racist. I mean, undoubtedly it's racist, it's founded on racism, that it's alienated, that, you know, an existence of any person with any independent thoughts in their heads within it, particularly if they're a woman, is, you know, is just not tenable. You're meant to be a decoration, to walk around looking demure and not to do anything that's not part of the rules. And that also it shows, I think, that the monarchy is very fragile. And I hope it will lead to the monarchy becoming more unpopular and the growth of popularity of republicanism. And in relation to, I think it's Michael Craig, yes, you know, speaking about Ireland and republicanism, firstly, I think that republicanism is something that needs to be fought for by the working class. It's not something that you want to be handing to liberals or bourgeois and Republicans. It's something that in the interest of the working class to fight for, because fighting for republicanism for the working class means fighting for democracy, for the accountability of our elected representatives on a worker's wage, for, you know, in Britain, perhaps something like a united federal republic in order to resolve the national question. But it's a practical, necessary step for the working class to do that. I mean, the monarchy plays a reactionary role and it continues a repressive government. It underpins the bourgeoisie's control. Now, in Ireland, obviously, we've had a particular history of republicanism, and clearly we've had Sinn Féin come to power in Northern Ireland and becoming stronger in the south. But like, despite the fact that the Irish struggle has led to limitations, you know, in terms of the working class not, you know, working class haven't come to power, I think it's far better that we even have what we have today than remaining under the cosh of the British monarchy in Ireland. But also in terms of republicanism in Ireland, the working class needs to take up the struggle for democracy and republicanism and united democratic Ireland. And again, I mean, I won't repeat the points I've made in terms of Britain, but there are similar points to make. It's not a question of it being left to the bourgeoisie. It's not a question of uniting with liberals. It's a question of the working class raising these important political questions and of us being, as our class, the representatives of all oppressed, and recognizing even among the privileged of our society that they too can suffer oppression because of the kind of environment that they live in. Anyway, thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Anne. Good points. Hello, comrade. Can you unmute
Can you
yourself?
hear me?
Ah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So no, I just want to read a statement from a comrade. His name is Brother Shakara, and he made a kind of appointment statement the other day. He said the only reason why so much of Black Britain is so hyped about this Meghan and Harry nonsense is simply because we were invested in the illusion of inclusion that this marriage presented to us. We thought somehow Meghan marrying into the colonizer's monarchy was symbolic of our our collective progress. Our collective sensibilities are offended now because all these revelations have made a lie of all this emotional investment. Illusion shattered. We are now vexed at the colonizer for being the colonizer, vexed with Britain for not being as inclusive as we dreamed it was. The only thing we have left is the idea that one of the royals is so down and so in love with one of us, he is prepared to sacrifice his family. So we must rally to his, her, their defense. But the colonizer will always be the colonizer. And as long as we desire for the colonizer to embrace us, is as long as we will be the colonized. So that's all I wanted to say. And it's interesting that Dr. Cornel West has, you know, he's been having issues with Harvard recently and his tenure and stuff, and you know, all these kind of establishment, you know, organizations that we try and like, you know, I'm here because of Jackie. I'm a big fan of hers, and I felt for her the stuff she went through a couple of years ago, and I kind of follow her, and I thought, yeah, it was a bit of a distraction, this whole role thing, but it is interesting. I feel like Harry's has kind of like evolved a lot from the days of like, you know, his Nazi costumes and stuff like that, and sometimes, you know, you do need to. It does take kind of being on the other side and you know, walking in someone else's shoes to kind of experience what people go through, and so yeah, more power to them. And but I'm definitely not a royalist. I missed Jackie's I missed all the early statements because I was on another call. But yeah, just thank you for taking my call. I don't want to take up too much time, so thank you for having me.
Thank you, comrade. We're gonna put this up online very soon on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it then. Okay, comrades, I suggest now that Steve and Jackie give 5 minutes to sum up some of the issues that were raised. As Jackie's spoken in the discussion, I suggest Steve goes first.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Yes, I can't respond to all those points. It's a very interesting discussion. I was listening to everything everybody said, and lots of different angles. It gets you into a whole big discussion about how society works. That's what's really interesting about this thing. You know, it appears to be a minor thing, but it obviously links to the main thing. My main point, really, and the one I want to really get over, is to draw a distinction between the crown and the queen. Now, people mix these two things up. And often when they're talking about the crown, they're actually talking about the queen. The queen is over there in Buckingham Palace. The crown is the state power. It's the bureaucratic power. It's the military power that's run from Downing Street and Whitehall. And that is the target of Republicans. We want to get rid of that. We don't care about, I mean, I'll make it, to make it just a bit extreme, we don't care about the Queen particularly. We just want to get rid of the crown. That's the thing. But we realize if we get rid of the crown, we can't keep the Queen, obviously. We want to replace a bureaucratic, top-down, liberal state without a proper constitution with a proper, fully working democracy where power comes from the people, the sovereign power of the people, where we can elect and call people to account and make them subject to recall. So we are dealing with the state power that controls people's lives, whether it's military, whether it's police, whether it's bureaucratic, whether it's making our laws. That's the problem we've got. And in a way, the monarchy is an attempt to distract us from that, make us look over there over at Buckingham Palace. And then we can argue whether has she got any power, yes or no? Well, actually, she's got a lot more power than we imagine, by the way. She's a very key person in this position, but she's not ruling anybody. Boris Johnson's doing it. But we're not here to say, well, let's get rid of King Boris and have King Keir Starmer there, or even King Jeremy for that point, because we want to change the system of government. That's the thing. And we have to therefore not mix up these two things. One is there to distract us from the real source of state power. Now, let's take something else. The class struggle in the House of Windsor. It's really a struggle, I'm arguing, between the traditionalist conservative wing and the liberal, more reformist wing. We can't necessarily see exactly what that is. But as I said before, it will expose to us a lot of the things that's going on behind the scenes, including, as the last speaker said, about the way in which Black people look at the situation. They're invested in thinking that they would be incorporated into the system through Megxit, and that's now shown to be an illusion. So that's why we need to look about how that struggle is going on. It's a part of the class struggle. It's not separate from the rest of the struggle. And I'll finish maybe on this one point, which is this. I want to go back to what Albert said and say I basically agree with Jackie, but I want to say that a couple of points about that. Number one, you can't look at Meghan in isolation. Meghan is in a fight, and Harry, with the Queen and Prince Charles. So if we take Meghan out of it and just say, what do we think to Meghan on her own, as if we're really in effect siding with Charles and the Queen on the other side of that argument. You know, if you take one side in a battle, what happens to the other side? So it's wrong to look at Meghan in isolation from a bigger struggle that's going on. Secondly, and Lenin had this point, he said, social democrats are tribunes of the people. He said in this, we're able to respond to all forms of oppression, no matter who it affects, no matter what class or strata of society it affects. All right, you said that's what we're doing, because we want to do that to illustrate the class nature of society. If a billionaire is beating up a millionaire, okay, we're going to highlight that point to show how the class system actually works. And we're not going to say, oh, we're sitting on the fence because that person's a millionaire. No, we are going to be tribunes of the people, of democracy and of justice and all those other things. And that's the approach that we have to say. And then you say one other point, which is also important. He said the working class cannot understand or get self-knowledge by looking at itself, at its own conditions, only looking at poverty, housing, inequality, jobs, and all these other things. The working class can only see itself as a political class, can become educated as a political class by looking at the sum total of everything that's going on throughout society. So when we look at the royal family, when we look at the crown, we're looking at the other part of society, which is the opposite of the position of the working class, and therefore we can get that position. I'll finish.
Okay. Okay. Jackie, please. For 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, really, thank you to Heru, because that quote, as far as I'm concerned, just said so much about the subtlety of the positioning that we find ourselves in. This game which is being played, has been played, if you like, in terms of Caribbean people, in the most painful way possible. And I'm going to shorten it out by saying it like this. First of all, you are stolen from your country. You have your identity ripped away from you and your language. You are forced to work, to reproduce, to give your body, to have your body made into property in the most base way possible. You become the first example of true modernity, because your body becomes a commodity in itself to be traded and to be valued. When they finish with you in that way, they then tell you that your ex-slave masters are actually your mother country, not the fatherland, remember, like the Germans, but your mother country, the place that gives you nurture, the place that gives you your language, the place that gives you your culture. You then look up to your monarch as your matriarch. This is how millions of Caribbeans saw themselves. And then you come to this country and you suddenly find, look, you are still that black person. You are still that person who we sold and who we subjugated and who we raped. But we can still play that game with you. We can still give you that fantasy by imagining that the monarchy is yours. And this is the first crack in that game. And it works in exactly the same way with the working class. That's the way it has worked. And I'll just give you one joke about this. This is about a man, he's sitting there, it's the Blitz. It's during the war, and his legs have been blown off, and he's lost his wife. His kids are lying dead over there. His house is in ruins, but the royal family come over and they talk to him about who he is and what's happened to him. And later on, a reporter comes and he said, oh, it's just terrible what's happened to you. Can you how do you feel about it? And he said, oh, I met the royal family. It was the best day of my life. And that is the trick that is played on the working classes. And that is a function of the royal family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I do love a joke about the war. Second World War always goes down well with Germans. Thank you very much, comrades. I thought that was a very interesting discussion touching on a lot of different issues. I think also if you put Jackie and Albert on a platform, we could have a very interesting discussion, perhaps at some stage in the future. Thank you very much for joining us, comrades. If you are a supporter of the LLA, there's a supporters meeting tomorrow where we'll be talking about the attacks on the left and how we can fight back, plans for Labour Party conference, etc. If you want to get involved in the Republican Labour working group, please email info@labourleft.org. That's the one. Thank you very much for attending, and see you all soon. Have a good evening. Bye-bye. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Steve. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.